4 gambling, pokies in pubs, clubs and TABs is characterised as high-risk, high-turnover gambling and is the most harmful form of gambling in New Zealand. We disagree with the Council's view that no changes are necessary for this policy review. The current policy does not go far enough to prevent gambling harm for those in the community. We strongly advocate for a sinking lid policy with no relocations or club mergers permitted. A sinking lid policy takes on a public health and preventative approach to gambling harm. It tries to address those who experience mild to moderate gambling harm, as well as severe harmful gambling. Emerging research also shows that sinking lid policy is one of the best policies available to reduce the losses from gambling. More and more councils across New Zealand are considering a sinking lid policy. Currently, we have a record-breaking tally of 32 councils who have a sinking lid. Understandably, councillors may be concerned that adopting a sinking lid will reduce or impact community funding from Class 4 grants. There's no evidence to suggest that a sinking lid will lead to reduced funding. For example, Christchurch City Council has had a sinking lid policy for about 20 years and funding has remained consistent. And this is because a sinking lid occurs slowly over time and relies on a venue closing for numbers of poker machines to decrease in the district. Concerningly, Timaru District has the highest loss per adult in the Canterbury District. So $10.2 million was lost on poker machines in Timaru last year, and this meant that approximately $280 was lost per adult in Timaru in 2021. And this is higher than the national average of $239 per adult. Given that a sinking lid policy helps reduce problem gambling expenditure by 13%, it is clear that a sinking lid policy with no relocations or club mergers would be the most appropriate option for council. And on my slides, I had a lovely graph that showed the expenditure across the region, but using the statistics from 2021, for every poker machine in the district, $61.4 thousand was lost to each machine, and this is more than double the median income for Timaru residents, which is $30.3 thousand. Now we can hear from Anna.
So, kia ora, I'm Anna. I've worked at PGF for the last 3 years and I've been coming to Timaru for the past 18 months fortnightly. I'm not here to talk about the statistics. I'm here to share some of the stories that I've heard from people who experience gambling harm in Timaru. Whilst shame is a massive factor in harmful gambling, I do find that stands out more in Timaru. As where I'm based at Timaru Community House, there's very few of the clients will come and meet me there. They prefer me to meet them in surrounding areas such as Temuka, and then we'll go off to the gardens where they believe they won't be seen by other people in the public that may know them. Clients in the district talk about other people that they know who struggle with the porkies. They say that they don't acknowledge it to each other, despite the fact that they see each other daily, and then at times they've seen each other lining up at the food banks. Multi-venue exclusion is a brilliant tool that individuals can use to help them be excluded from the gaming areas and venues. However, one of the things that I've noticed is people in Timaru are really reluctant to implement these. And they often say that it's because they know the people in the pubs or somebody's daughter works at that pub and they don't want their mum finding out that they're struggling with the porkies. Yeah.
Thanks, Anna. So we have a short account of something that a client shared with us for this hearing. And so that is, recovery is an ongoing process. I don't really see there being a balance in the current policy. Pokies aren't designed to give you a balance. They're designed to take your money. There is more that the council can do for our community, and there's a more full account in the written submission which you would have read. So in the next part of our presentation, we'd like to counter several assertions made by the gambling industry. Firstly, Class 4 gambling is often portrayed as being beneficial by way of community grants. Under the Gambling Act, Class 4 societies are required to return 40% of GMP to the community by way of grants. However, it cannot be guaranteed that the GMP lost in Timaru is returned to groups in Timaru. For example, approximately 31% of the GMP lost in Timaru was returned to Timaru-based organisations in 2021. Unfortunately, the Class 4 funding model has inextricably linked gambling harm with the survival of community groups, sports and services. Several reports from the Ministry of Health and Department of Internal Affairs have questioned the parity of this funding system. A sinking lid policy takes a long time to create change. As I previously said, the Christchurch City Council has had a sinking lid policy for about 20 years, and the funding has remained consistent. Over half of councils in Aotearoa have a sinking lid policy, and most of them want more restrictions. We would also like to ask the council to think about where the money is coming from in the first place, rather than where it is going, and whether this is an ethical source of community funding. A study conducted by Central Queensland University and Auckland University of Technology in 2017 found that harmful gambling has a burden 2.5 times higher than diabetes. The council must consider the risk if the risk of this level of harm is worth the funding. The industry often states that for every dollar spent on the pokies, 91 cents is returned to the punter and 9 cents is taxed. This is a misleading statement and overly simplifies the workings of a pokie machine. While 91 cents is returned eventually, this is done so randomly and occurs over the long term, often described as the game cycle of a pokie machine. Most pokie games have a very large number of potential outcomes, frequently 50 million or more, and this can take years for them to roll through. Therefore, it's highly unlikely that an individual punter will be returned 91 cents for every dollar they spend on a pokie machine. Lastly, council would have come across the argument that removing pokie machines will only see an increase in online gambling, and this would not benefit the community groups regarding Class 4 funding. We would like to counter this argument and highlight that, importantly, there is no evidence that online gambling is replacing pokies. Online gambling is often brought up as a red herring to distract councillors from the issue at hand, which is Class 4 gambling. Online gambling is regulated by central government and it cannot be addressed through council's Class 4 gambling policies. While online gambling has been growing and increased during lockdowns, information from the DIA shows an increase in pokie losses up to 116% post-lockdown. This was a much higher increase than forecasted and reflects people returning to Class 4 gambling after lockdown. This reiterates that pokies remain the most harmful form of gambling in New Zealand. Thank you again for the opportunity to present today. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear them.
Thanks, Evie and Anna. Questions from the floor team? Oh, sorry, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, ladies. I've probably got at least one question. So, your service of max capacity is 30 to 40 people, so that's per year. So, just thinking about our community as a whole, are you seeing that those 30 to 40 people a year, is there need to increase the level of service? Would that equate to the 16% of clients that access services which has been reported in the reports about that need services? So are you at the capacity of seeing problem gamblers seeking help? If not, I'd like to know, and if so, is there any capacity to look at extending your service?
So, last year, July 2020 to June 2021, 36 residents of Timaru, 12 of which were new clients, accessed service. And this is a reasonably low number, but we also know that most of the people who are experiencing harmful gambling are not accessing service. There's so many barriers like what Anna talked about. Is there anything you'd like to add to that question?
No.
Yeah, presentation numbers unfortunately are not an accurate representation of the harm that is being experienced. There could be the capacity for, if people are coming forward, that we could increase our service down here.
Definitely.
And we would be more than willing to do that. Obviously, as Anna said, she comes down fortnightly for 2 days, so that does limit the amount of people that we can see, but she does try to be very flexible with back-to-back appointments to see as many as possible.
Yeah, and we've also been told that, if there were more people to come, that I'm to stay longer on the second day and what have you. So yeah, we definitely can do more.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. So in terms of the example that you brought up in regards to Christchurch having a sinking lid process there, and you've said that the year on year the funding has not decreased. Have you drilled into that at all to enlighten us as to how that could happen? And bearing in mind there's been a significant shift in there because of the processes of the earthquake and what have you, changing the licensed premises and what have you. So a sinking lid would suggest that would be quite significant. And so therefore, what's the correlation between the no reduction at all in the funding?
So I'm not sure if there is no reductions. It has remained consistent. I couldn't say that there was no decrease. That is something that I would have to look into further and could get that information for you. Thank you.
OJ.
Thank you, Abby. Just want to get your thoughts on whether or not you agree with the fact that people who are unable to gamble in institutions where there are gambling, Class 4 gambling machines, if there aren't enough machines available, that will push them into online gambling, which is not a regulated space, obviously. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think, as I said, we saw that with lockdown, online gambling did increase, but as soon as the venues opened again, there was a massive influx of people returning to the venues, and a lot of clients, as far as I'm aware, who were poker gamblers, actually a lot of them did stop when lockdown happened and were relieved that they couldn't go to a venue, that it wasn't possible. So it wasn't an automatic shift of, okay, now I'm going to move. It was a certain people did, but it wasn't across the board for everyone. And I think as well, the issue at hand today is the Class 4 gambling. Online gambling is regulated by the larger government and by the Department of Internal Affairs, and the local council still has a role to play in terms of the Class 4 gambling. Hope that answered your question. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks, team. Thanks, Abby and Anna. Thanks for taking the time to come and present. We really appreciate that. And so you know the process. We're having hearings this morning, and then we're dealing with the papers this afternoon. So as far as decisions, so thanks so much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Righty, I think we're all good now. We're going to go to Jared True, who is on line with us. Welcome, Jared. And
Thank you.
We've got 10 minutes for a presentation, and please just save some time for questions, and the floor's yours.
Excellent, thank you. I'll just share my screen. Right. You able to see the slides there? So I'm Jared True. I represent the Gaming Machine Association of New Zealand. The association represents the vast majority of New Zealand's gaming machine societies. We support your current policy, the current open policy, which has worked well in your district and suits your district. We do, however, oppose the 7-machine limit for new venues, and we also ask that you consider including a relocation policy, which is very popular with councils, including Kaikoura just recently adopting one this week. Your current open policy is reasonable, given the very low problem gambling rate, benefits that come from the local machines, and the growth of online gambling. Just to keep everything independent and factual, I'm just referring to the Council's independent social impact assessment report that was obtained. That report was excellent, very thorough. It said that Timaru had a moderate risk gambling profile. It's noted that Timaru's problem gambling presentation rates were below the national average, which confirms a low level of risk in your district. And it also described the number of machines that you currently have as pretty much typical, having regard to the number of adults you've got and the number of machines you've got. The report also noted the main benefit that comes from the machines, which is, of course, player enjoyment. People enjoy playing the machines. In addition to that, there's significant community funding that's generated, approximately $3.8 million every year in community purposes. That's in relation to the grants that are made to local clubs, the grants to national and regional organisations that have local benefit, and also the funding that's generated from the machines for your 2 club venues. In addition to the community funding, we've got tax that's generated for the government to pay for hospitals, schools and roads, about $3.4 million. And importantly, the machines also support the local hospitality venues, providing a venue payment, a payment for hosting the machines, supervising the machines and maintaining the machines. That's approximately $1.4 million every year. The problem gambling rate is very low. It's only 0.2% of the adult population. That's extremely low by international standards. We haven't seen a link between gaming machine numbers and problem gambling rates. Over the last 10 years, we've lost 25% of our machines nationally. It's about 4,600 machines that we've lost. However, in exactly the same 10-year period, the problem gambling rate has plateaued. It hasn't reduced in correlation to the machines being removed. Just in relation to your policy that has a 7 machine limit, the Gambling Act expressly allows new venues to have 9 machines. There's no research or evidence that suggests having 7 machines has a benefit in relation to problem gambling. If someone's going to be addicted to gambling, they're still going to be able to access one of the 7 machines that are there. However, having 9 machines not only improves the enjoyment offering and entertainment offering because it gives players a greater choice, but importantly, having 7 machines at a venue reduces the amount of community funding that's generated. Remember, all the profits from these machines get distributed out in community grants. So if we were to have 2 9-machine venues, we would have 2 lots of set fixed costs. We would have 2 electronic monitoring systems. We'd construct 2 gaming rooms. We'd have two sets of signages on the wall, two sets of staff to check, and 2 licenses to apply for. If we had 3 7-machine venues, then we'd have to have 3 electronic monitoring systems, build 3 rooms, have 3 sets of staff to train, etc. So we would make more community funding would be generated from 2 9-machine venues rather than 3 7-machine venues. So it just seems appropriate to have a smaller number of venues, but have a greater offering at those venues to reduce those fixed costs that we incur. So in order for us to be able to increase that funding that goes out to the community. The one thing that's slightly different with your current policy than pretty much most other councils' policies now is it doesn't include a relocation provision. Parliament amended the Gambling Act to require councils to consider when the policy was reviewed, including a relocation provision, because they considered that relocation was a harm minimisation tool. First and foremost, it allows existing venues to move out of areas that may be considered to be undesirable, such as residential areas or higher deprivation areas. Not allowing relocation simply entrenches those venues in areas that may be less than desirable. Having a relocation provision is also fair to the local business owners. It enables those businesses to be restored following a fire, a natural disaster, a flood, or even public works acquisition, which we do see from time to time. Having a relocation provision also protects the valuable community funding. If we have a relocation provision and there's a disaster like we saw in Kaikoura with the earthquake, or in Christchurch with the earthquake, enables those venues to rebuild, to set up across the road. Not having a relocation provision requires those venues to stay put when they may not be able to be restored in their current sites. Relocation also enables venues to move out of earthquake-prone buildings. If existing venues in an older building and they want to move across the road or down the street to a newer, modern, stronger building and take their machines with them, having a relocation provision enables a venue to pick up their 18 machines, move down the road, and to go into a safer building. It also enables venues to free up larger blocks of land. We may have some club venues or traditional tavern venues that have large car parking area. If they're able to move to newer, smaller, modern premises, that large block of land may be better used for other purposes, such as high-density, low-cost housing. The current situation is that if a venue's got 18 machines, the landlord knows that that's a desirable thing for the tenant to have. They knows that the tenant can't move if the council doesn't have a relocation policy, and that results in landlords pushing up the rent beyond market and also imposing unreasonable terms. If you have a relocation provision, it prevents that market distortion happening. And finally, and importantly, if we have a relocation provision, it just simply allows venues to invest in their business and move to newer, modern premises. The very first venue that took advantage of the relocation provisions was the Te Rapa Tavern in Hamilton. It was able to move from the venue on the left there to the venue on the right. It was able to take its 18 machines with it under the relocation policy, and that became then economically viable to spend the over $3 million that got spent in the fit out. So we went from a Once More Warriors type establishment with black singlets and white gumboots to a craft beer sports bar offering, which is just absolutely fantastic. Having those new modern facilities makes the city vibrant, helps with tourism, and helps to create local employment. Finally, relocation is extremely common. I now have approximately 60 councils that have a relocation provision in place. Thank you for that. Welcome your questions.
Thanks, Jared. Questions, team? No one? You're all okay? Question from me, sinking lid versus the current 7 machine, you said it's not really economically viable effectively, to run a venue with 7 machines. So is there any difference from your point of view in those policies? Because they're both quite hard to make it work from a venue point of view, aren't they?
I'm not saying that 7 machines is uneconomic. 7 machines is economic, but it would probably generate a profit percentage of about 20%. About 20% of the money that's lost would go out in community grants. Whereas a 9 machine venue, having less fixed costs per machine, would generate closer to the 40%. So it's still economically viable, and you'd still do it. It just reduces the community funding that comes from the machines. Thus, I think it'd simply be better to have a policy that would welcome 2 venues with 9 machines as opposed to 3 venues with 7 machines.
Cool. Thank you. Any other questions? No, that's it. Thanks, Jared. I really appreciate taking the time for the submission and also dialing in to present. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Right now we've got Martin. Welcome, Martin, from Pub Charity.
Is that Mike Lott? Okay, yep, that answers that question. Thank you. Good morning, Your Worship, councillors, members of the executive. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Martin Chair. I have been involved with Pub Charity for 15 years, initially with our charitable iteration, Pub Charity Incorporated, and since 2015 we operate as a not-for-profit company. Basically in the last month I've been appointed Managing Director of that company. We've been operating gaming machines in New Zealand since 1987, and as far as I'm aware we've been operating continually in the Timaru district, probably for that long. We are the largest gaming trust. We distribute about $37 million a year annually, and we have quite a significant footprint in this area. So I guess today is about a clash of 2 ideas. On one hand, the government and ourselves support the idea that the risks associated with Class 4 gambling can be mitigated and managed and controlled. And on the other hand, you've got people saying that that's not possible and this risk needs to be removed from the community. And I think the challenge for policy makers is that the sheer volume of information and the difficulty in making an evidence-based decision. Just want to show you this slide here, and this is an example. You've just been told the Problem Gambling Foundation doesn't have any concerns about migration to online gambling if there's a prohibition on terrestrial or fixed venue-based gambling. This is actually an article quoting the Problem Gambling Foundation about concerns about migration to online gambling during lockdowns. The then Minister of Internal Affairs, Tracy Martin, pointed out that we know what will happen if we ban Class 4 gambling, because we saw exactly what happened during lockdowns, which was a massive proliferation in online gambling activity, particularly Sky City's online website based out of Malta, and which saw revenue increase from around $150,000 to $17 million. And every form of online gambling, including the racing board and lotto, saw massive increases, and to some degree those gains have not subsided post-lockdown. So therein lies the difficulty. We get told one thing, the evidence is something else. And I appreciate the position you're in. I'm going to try the best I can to stick to the evidence. And I think from an evidence perspective, your policy is solid. It's consistent with the Gambling Act, and basically it relies on trusted partners like Pub Charity to keep up our end of the bargain, making sure that people are as safe as possible, and where we do identify people with issues, we then bring in people like the Problem Gambling Foundation. And what's disappointing is that for some time they haven't had a presence here in Timaru, and we found a lot of frustration with that. A lot of resources go into telling you what to do and not what to do, but they can't seem to find a person to come down here and help people. So The other, basically, this is the principle behind this argument. If you implement a sinking lid, you'll get these three benefits here. You'll see a reduction in problem gambling, you'll see a decrease in gambling spend, and there will be no migration to online gambling. All of those claims are wrong. And again, this is not my opinion, the evidence says otherwise. Basically, the number of gaming machines in New Zealand has decreased by a third, and with the population growth since 2004, means that the exposure ratio of machines to population is halved. So if you take this concept of exposure being the underlying principle to harm, you would see an inverse reduction in harm. That was what you would expect from that type of impact. But there's been absolutely no reduction in the problem gambling prevalence rate since the late 1990s, according to the Ministry of Health. So if people are going to bring an argument around public health, I think they've got to actually make sure they're in alignment with their agencies like the Ministry of Health and their own people. In fact, if they're going to go to the media and say there's been a surge of online gambling and then turn up at a policy meeting like this and say there isn't, then I think you've got to get your act together, really. But just the background, Whakatere operates 5 venues and 69 machines. That's probably the largest footprint here. We distributed grants of 4.3 million. I actually found a double up in the back of our submission as the list of grants over the last 3 years. There's actually a double up of one of the grants to the hospice, so that's actually $150,000 less than that, so my apologies for that. Our venues here are fitted with enhanced harm minimisation measures, facial recognition technology. We're about to roll out an enhanced version of that which will allow the cameras to track people's presence in the room. Currently we rely on staff to do that, and you can imagine in a busy bar that's a challenge. The new cameras will have the capacity to actually record continuous presence in the room, and we currently have policies where people the staff are trained to intervene after certain periods of play to inquire into the well-being of the person. And over an extended period of play, there'd be an intervention interview and inquiring about their well-being and potentially removing them from the venue. The difficulty is actually tracking the continuous presence of someone in the room. These cameras will allow that and trigger an alert for the staff, which means they can go in and speak to the person. And principally, it's just an inquiry into their well-being. Someone being continuously present in a gaming room doesn't mean anything other than that. However, it's potentially a sign of problems and the staff are required to intervene. It goes without saying we support your current policy. I'm not sure. Well, here are these movements, and so basically we've seen this decline in venues and machines and funding, and gambling spend's actually increased. So for every dollar that's coming out of the Class 4 market, there's been $1.20 spent in the other forms of gambling. And in addition to that, we've seen online gambling increase from virtually nothing to estimated to be $650 million offshore in the next 12 months. And as far as that not being a concern for the government, I can tell you it's serious. It's the only piece of work that the Department of Internal Affairs has worked on over the last 3 years, and they cannot figure out a way to actually get control of this trend. They're very reluctant to impose the type of aggressive geo-blocking that would be necessary in intervention with the banks. That would require that to stem the flow of that. And unfortunately, it's a trend that's here to stay. And again, our treatment strategies need to respond to that instead of denying this happening. These issues around sinking lids not working have been known for some time, and this is a report from 2006 by one of New Zealand's now disgraced, but one of New Zealand's leading problem gambling researchers. Reduction in caps appear to have little impact. No change in problem gambling since 2006, and probably no change since the 1990s, and yet we've seen a drastic reduction in the number of gaming machines. And herein lies the problem. If you're trying to get to that one person by impacting on the rights of everybody, you're just not going to find them, are you? And we have to change our whole approach. And the other thing that's significant, I don't know why that's disappearing, but one thing that is significant is the most common source of problem gamblers is relapsed problem gamblers. 2 out of every 3 people that report statistically as problem gamblers in the next 12 months are known to the system, and the treatment strategy has failed. If you want to stem the tide of problem gamblers, we have got to change our approach to treatment, not trying to boil the pot of water down to that one person in 2000 that ultimately is playing one of our machines. We're not responsible for all forms of problem gambling, somewhere around about 40%. So that tells you we're not talking about the other 60%. So those 40% need to be identified by far more effective means than what we're using at the moment. And just to summarise, I mean, here's the complexity of the situation. Problem gamblers are comorbid with multiple mental and physical health issues. So you're dealing with a complex disorder, and this simplistic approach just doesn't cut it. And we are treading water, and have been since this strategy was implemented in 2004. And we will continue to tread water until people grow up and realise there are vulnerable people in the community, and we have to find them and intervene. We have to customise our approach. We've got people that are seriously wired incorrectly, and they don't just have a problem with gambling. And we spend a lot of money, and all it's turned into is propaganda. And these are the same people who simultaneously argue to criminalise tobacco and legalise cannabis. You know, that's the type of crazy, ban coal while we import 1 million tonnes of sulphur-ridden coal from Indonesia. It just doesn't make any sense, and some common sense has to prevail. Sinking lids reduce funding for the communities, no doubt about that. In inflation-adjusted terms, community funding's declined by 1/3, and consistent with the revenue. I mean, we give away a portion of our revenue. Less revenue means less funding. In inflation-adjusted terms, revenue's declined by 35%, and so is community funding. And community groups will tell you there's less money from this source of revenue. And it's been a pointless exercise, quite honestly. I don't think we've helped one person. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Martin. Really comprehensive questions. Councillor Parker.
Just a quick question, just out of interest, when you say an extended period of play, what is that time of extended period of play? 3 hours.
3 hours.
Thank you.
And ironically, in the casino, it's 5. I don't know why it's 5 in the casino, but it's 3 now. We've voluntarily adopted that standard. But they're being supervised the whole time.
Councillor Burt.
Yeah, just in terms of the facial recognition software that you're going to implement, so that is separate to the pokie machine itself. This has to be put into the venue.
It's dedicated to people that are excluded. So the previous speakers talked about exclusion orders, and they are a very solid tool. So people that identify or are identified as needing a break or to time away can enter into this agreement with venues where they're excluded. The problem is, of course, people change, their appearance changes, and you're talking about people with a control disorder. So it can become very difficult to police them. So facial recognition is dedicated to those images which are loaded, and if someone walks into the venue, into the gaming room, the staff are immediately alerted, and there's an intervention.
And this is voluntary and in terms of its uptake for all venues, or it's going to be part of some form of system?
Yeah, it's not. In fact, we've advocated it should be in low decile areas, high risk areas like South Auckland, for example. And ironically, we've had opposition from the Ministry of Health and the Department of Internal Affairs around privacy concerns. And yet these are people that have put their name forward and said, I need help, please help me. It's expensive, and we'd like some support from the Ministry of Health, because they get this levy, $26 million a year now, and basically not enough of it is spent on effective measures like that. But so we fought the bill, basically, as a society.
Thanks, Councillor Burt. Thanks, Martin. Really appreciate you coming and speaking to us today. So that's the end of submissions in regard to gambling. We're just going to move now.